In late 1986, 39-year-old Helle Crafts disappeared from her home in Newtown, Connecticut. As she was a devoted mother of 3 and a reliable employee, her sudden disappearance was a cause for concern. At first, the police didn't take it seriously, but thanks to the pressure of friends, family, and a private investigator, the grisly truth behind her vanishing soon came to light. On December 1st, 1986, police in Newtown, Connecticut received a worried phone call from a private investigator named Keith Mayo. Keith was working for 39-year-old Helle Crafts, a Danish-born flight attendant who was beginning divorce proceedings from her husband. Helle had been married to 49-year-old Richard Crafts for over 10 years. They had 3 children together and lived a comfortable lifestyle, with Crafts earning over $120,000 a year as a commercial airline pilot. However, in the months leading up to Helle's disappearance, the pair's relationship had started to crumble after the 39-year-old began to suspect that her husband was having an affair. She had recently discovered a series of long-distance phone call charges, and when she confronted Crafts about them, he became angry. Helle subsequently met with a divorce lawyer and hired Keith Mayo to find evidence of her husband's infidelity. Keith, for his part, found the evidence that Helle had requested. After spending time surveying Crafts, he managed to snap photographs of the 49-year-old kissing another flight attendant outside of her New Jersey residence. When Keith contacted the police, he told them that he had not heard from Helle in weeks, and he was concerned that her husband may have harmed her. He pushed for the police to investigate the disappearance immediately, telling them that the 39-year-old was last seen on November 18th, when she was dropped off at her home by her friends after a long stint at work, which saw her on a flight to Frankfurt, Germany. Nobody ever saw or heard from Helle again. She was due to drive to her sister-in-law's house on November 19th in nearby Westport, but she never showed up. Her car was later located in the employee car park of Pan Am Airlines at Kennedy Airport. It appears that the reason Helle was not immediately reported missing by her other friends was that Crafts gave various stories to account for her whereabouts. He told the family's au pair on November the 21st, just 2 days after she vanished, that she was in Denmark because her mother was ill. She told another friend of Helle's that she was on a trip to Germany. Sometimes he simply stated that he didn't know where she was. But as the days became weeks and Helle remained out of touch, her friends began to grow concerned. They knew that Crafts had a volatile temper and would later report that Helle had previously warned them, "If something happens to me, don't think it was an accident." On November 29th, a friend of Helle's named Lena Johansson obtained the phone number for her mother in Denmark and discovered that she was perfectly fine and hadn't been in contact with Helle. She explained that she didn't expect to see her daughter until April 1987. She had no idea that she was missing. Despite all of it, the police were not initially very suspicious of Crafts, nor were they overly concerned about Helle's sudden disappearance. Local police in Newtown were already familiar with 49-year-old Crafts, as he had been an auxiliary police officer since 1982 and had a good relationship with most of the officers. He had a reputation as being a stickler for the rules who took his responsibilities seriously, no matter how limited they were, and despite the fact that he was not in a paid position. Some officers did note, however, that he often hung around the station while not on duty and sometimes responded to calls without authorization. When the police approached Crafts on December 2nd, he was very unfazed and calm about his wife's disappearance. He told them that she'd come home on the 18th and that around the time she was happy and showed no signs of being different or upset. The following morning, the pair awoke and Helle planned to visit Crafts' sister because we had no power due to the storm. However, she didn't arrive. He added, "I've not seen or heard from my wife since Wednesday, November 19th, 1986. It's unclear why he didn't report her missing, but investigators at the time did not seem to be particularly bothered by this suspicious aspect of the case. The police continued not to prioritize Helle's case for several days after she vanished, putting her disappearance down to potential marital problems. It wasn't until they began to interview her loved ones that they started to suspect that something was amiss, as all of her friends and family agreed on one thing: she would never up and leave her young children, especially in such an abrupt manner, without making sure that they would be safe and well cared for. It was at this time that investigators learned too that Crafts had engaged in a series of extramarital affairs, something which was now well known amongst Helle's closest. Lena Johansson, who'd reached out to Helle's mother, told the police what she knew, including telling them of Helle's chilling warning before she vanished. Authorities also discovered during this time that it wasn't just the affairs that had contributed to the strain on the marriage. Reportedly, things had been rocky for some time. Crafts was in charge of the couple's finances, and as such, he often made large purchases to satisfy his passion for gun collecting without consulting Helle. He had dozens of weapons, from shotguns to revolvers and magnums, crossbows, and even grenades. He kept ammunition for all of his guns locked up in the home, and dedicated his free time to cleaning, polishing, and arranging his collection. He regularly attended gun shows to secure his next purchase, and often made Helle cover the costs of the house expenses with her wages, leaving her with nothing extra to spend on herself. Crafts was also prone to buying landscape equipment, much of which he never used. He once spent $25,000 on a backhoe. Neighbours reported that their garden was an eyesore due to the collection of machinery that never seemed to move, and they noted that the house was almost always having repairs done on it. Another thing Crafts spent money on was expensive training seminars, which educated him on police procedure. He did this beginning in 1986 after he joined the Southbury Police Department, where he received only $7 an hour, far below what he was making as a pilot. Some reporters would later describe the 49-year-old as carrying out his police duties with a strange fervour, and noted that he purchased a 1985 Ford Crown Victoria, the same type of car Connecticut State Police used, using his own money to equip it with police apparatus like a radio, lights, and a siren. On top of this, Crafts' propensity for violence was evident from early on in the marriage. Helle was seen several times in public with a bruised face, with at least one friend telling the police that Crafts had beaten his wife several times. She also recalled that Crafts had treated her terribly during her first pregnancy, with Helle telling the friend she would never forgive Crafts for what he put her through. Crafts' lack of interest in his family was another hurdle for the couple. According to Helle's friends, after the children were born, he would often disappear for days at a time. He refused to account for his whereabouts, simply packing a bag and leaving. Helle stated that she never knew if he was away on business, at a gun show, or somewhere else. Returning to the police interviews, eventually, investigators spoke with the couple's young au pair, Dawn Thomas. According to her, on the morning of November 19th, Crafts woke her at 6 a.m. and said that Helle was driving to her sister's house in Westport, and that they would meet her there later. Dawn recalled thinking that this was odd, since Newtown had just been hit with a brutal snowstorm. the condition of the roads would make it difficult to drive, and visibility was poor on top of that. Crafts claimed that they were going to Westport because the storm had led to a power outage, and he insisted that he take the children there right away. The 3 young children were woken at 6:30 and put into the family car, along with Dawn. Crafts drove the 4 to his sister's, dropped them off, and left almost immediately afterwards. Much to Dawn's surprise though, Helle wasn't at home. She and the children were not picked up until 7 p.m, and by that time, Helle was still nowhere to be seen. Dawn recalled asking Crafts later that night where his wife was. He told her, "I don't know." When she inquired again the following morning, he explained that she was in Denmark because her mother was ill. Dawn told investigators that it was around this time that she noticed the sections of the carpet in the master bedroom had been cut out, and when she pointed this out to Crafts, he explained that he'd spilt kerosene and he would replace the carpet when he could. This finally led investigators to become suspicious of Crafts. He was given a polygraph test in early December, which he passed, convincing some authorities that he was none the wiser about his wife's whereabouts. Some detectives, however, were still skeptical of his story, and many of them were weary of the fact that he'd taken up a low-paying police position, despite the fact that he was making over $100,000 a year with his air pilot career. There was also the fact that Helle's friends had only heard and seen negative things about Crafts. Many of her friends were clear in their disdain for Crafts and made their suspicions known to the police. They made sure to constantly call the police station for updates in her case, helping to put pressure on investigators to find answers. Crafts was called in for another interview on December 11th. During the interrogation, he was asked whether or not he knew Helle had hired a private investigator. He said no. When he was asked if he knew that the PI had caught him having an affair with another flight attendant, he also denied knowledge of this. He was then asked, "Why would your wife tell her friends she was afraid for herself regarding serving you divorce papers and tell them to check on her if something happened?" To which he reportedly replied, "I cannot imagine saying this. It is completely out of character for her to say this." When queried about the carpet in his master bedroom, Crafts claimed that he would be replacing all of the carpeting in the house. He told investigators that he had dumped the pieces he'd cut up in a landfill somewhere in the town, and claimed, when asked why he gave varying accounts about his wife's whereabouts, that he didn't want to admit he didn't know where she was. Although Crafts answered all of the questions sent his way, investigators noted that he seemed somewhat cautious and guarded. They also observed that while he wasn't lying, they believed he was telling only half-truths. They also thought he seemed rather distant and detached, considering his wife, the mother of his 3 children, had been missing for around 3 weeks. Crafts was subsequently released after giving another statement that amounted to a single page of unhelpful information, which mostly rehashed what authorities already knew. Bothered by the police's slow progress and highly suspicious of Helle's husband, PI Keith Mayo decided to pursue his own investigation into his client's disappearance. When he learned that Crafts had admitted to dumping the cut-out pieces of carpet in a landfill in town, he decided to recruit the help of a local trash pickup crew and determined that his garbage had likely gone to the Canterbury dump, about 2 hours east of Newtown. He gathered a few volunteers, and for several days they searched for the missing pieces of blue carpet. They finally came across a piece of carpet that matched the one in Crafts' master bedroom. Upon closer examination, Keith noticed the dark stain on the fabric and suspected that it might be blood. He subsequently handed the evidence over to the police, who sent it to a lab for forensic testing. The press finally caught wind of Helle's disappearance around this time, and an article was published in the Danbury News Times on December the 17th with the headline, "Police Seek Missing Newtown Woman." While police claimed they considered Helle's disappearance a simple missing persons case, Keith Mayo told reporters, "I don't think she disappeared on her own accord." He added, "I'm concerned that they're going after this piecemeal," referring to the Newtown Police Department. Keith was outspoken about his criticisms of the police's handling of the case, which led pressure to build against the authorities. The state's attorney's office looked to have the case handed over to Connecticut state investigators. A short time later, forensic results were returned on the piece of carpet found at the dump. Famed forensic scientist Dr. Henry Lee had been working at the lab at the time, and reported that despite their best efforts, none of the stains on the fabric tested positive for blood. Due to this setback and growing pressure, the case was handed over to detectives from the Western District Major Crimes Unit, who immediately zeroed in on Richard Crafts. Investigators started afresh, looking at what Crafts did in the days leading up to Helle's disappearance. While examining his credit card and phone records, they discovered that he had several bills on his MasterCard, showing that on November 13th, he purchased a large capacity freezer at an appliance store in Danbury for $375. He picked it up at the store on November 17th. He also rented an unspecified piece of machinery from Darien Rentals for $900. For detectives with the Major Crimes Unit, these were huge red flags. Why did Crafts need such a big freezer? And what kind of machine equipment costs nearly $1,000 to rent? Authorities spent the following days putting together a search warrant for the home Crafts had once shared with his wife, Helle. In the warrant, investigators noted Crafts' constantly changing stories about his wife's whereabouts, Helle's friends' statements about his violence and her fear of her husband, Crafts' odd apathy around her disappearance, and the statement given by the couple's au pair. They concluded that something violent had occurred and that Crafts knew more than he was letting on. They believed they would find the evidence they needed inside the home. Law enforcement soon learned that Crafts was on holiday with his children in Florida. This prompted investigators to execute the search warrant on December 25th. They found the home to be a mess. There was dirty clothing on the floor, unwashed cutlery, tableware and other dishes stacked up in the kitchen. And strangely, there was a bare mattress on the living room floor. The carpets in the home had already been pulled up, and investigators found a freezer, which they searched, but there was nothing inside it. They learned shortly afterwards that it was the couple's old freezer, not the one Crafts had recently purchased. His weapons collection was soon uncovered, bagged and tagged, and for days, forensic experts examined the home looking for evidence. As well as gathering Crafts' collection of weapons, authorities also collected some hand towels, washcloths, fibre samples, and a king-size mattress with bedding which had bloodstains on it. Further testing of the collected items revealed that the blood was a match to Helle's, and it was O positive. Dr. Henry Lee led the forensic sweep of the home. He carried out luminol tests, which showed that there was blood present in various locations around the building. Though the search yielded some interesting pieces of evidence, detectives were still none the wiser as to where exactly Helle Crafts was. The following week, however, progress was made again when law enforcement discovered that the $900 machinery Crafts had rented was for a woodchipper. He had picked up the unit on November 19th, leading detectives to suspect that it hadn't been used for simple wood chipping tasks. On December 30th, they located Joseph Hine, a utility man who'd been ploughing snow on the night of November 20th during the heavy storm. He told investigators that at around 3:30 a.m. he'd passed a box fan on the side of the road with its lights off and a large wood chipper attached to the back. He spotted a man, presumably the driver, near the rear of the truck. He passed by without giving it much thought, but returned again 2 hours later to find that it was still there, recalling, "I didn't see anyone in or around the truck or chipper. The back of the box was open and I could see some wood chips inside." He remembered thinking it was odd that somebody was chipping wood at 5:30 in the morning in the middle of a storm. Joseph later showed investigators where he'd spotted the truck that night, which led authorities to find piles of wood chips along the riverbank. Detectives found green plastic and shreds of paper mixed in with the chips. One scrap of paper read, Miss Helle Crafts, 5 Newfield Lane, Newtown, Connecticut. They soon called for a search team, which scoured the area, finding more pieces of paper with Helle's name on it, strands of blonde hair, fabric and cloth, bone fragments, and other unidentified material. All of the wood-chipped pieces and relevant evidence were gathered, and the police soon seized the exact woodchipper Crafts had rented. Divers were also dispatched into the river, and although the freezing temperatures made it difficult for them to stay under for very long, they were able to gather a few pieces of evidence, including a chainsaw with its serial number filed off. In the following days, on-land detectives found more eerie evidence, including a human toe, a fragment of a finger, and a piece of tooth. Dr. Henry Lee stated that by the time the search wrapped up, over 2,600 strands of blonde hair had been found, along with 69 slivers of human bone, 5 droplets of human blood, 2 teeth, 1 piece of human skull, 3 ounces of human tissue, a portion of a human finger, 1 fingernail, and 1 portion of human toenail. An arrest warrant for Richard Crafts was issued on January 11th, 1987. Police surrounded his home at 9 p.m. that night and called him, ordering him to come outside and surrender. Crafts reportedly replied, "I'm tired, I'll take care of it in the morning." When pushed by the police to step outside, he reportedly became enraged and yelled, "Don't call me back," before hanging up. After several further phone calls, Craft emerged after 12:30 a.m. and was arrested. Investigators, meanwhile, continued to search the banks of Lake Zoa and the water itself. By this time, they'd put together a theory as to what might have happened to Helle Crafts. They believed she was bludgeoned in the master bedroom during the small hours of November 19th, where blood had been discovered during their search, and that Crafts carried her body to the basement, where it was stored in the recently purchased freezer. He then woke Dawn and took her and the children to Westport before returning home afterwards. During the day, investigators suggested he took Helle's now frozen body to a rural piece of property he owned, where he used a saw to break it into smaller pieces before returning them to the freezer. In the middle of the night, he then ran the pieces through the woodchipper. Because of the means of disposal, Helle's case would later become known as the Woodchipper murder. Due to the massive amounts of publicity the case had attracted, Richard's trial was moved to New London, Connecticut. The prosecution had numerous forensic experts testify, including Dr. Henry Lee, who had been able to determine that 65 pieces of bone that had been recovered had been cut with a heavy type cutting edge that produced a crushing and cutting force. He was able to determine that the same machine had cut all of the pieces. The chainsaw that had been recovered from the bottom of the river also had a wealth of DNA evidence still attached, including human tissue, blood hair, and blue fibers, which were a match to the carpet from the master bedroom. The serial number was also restored by technicians, despite the attempt to file it off, which showed that it matched one which Richard had purchased back in 1981 for over $600. Investigators had found this receipt thanks to Keith Mayo, who'd been given a box of documents and paperwork by Helle, who told them they belonged to her husband. Unfortunately, a mistrial was declared after 53 days of trial due to one male holdout on the jury who wanted to push for a not guilty verdict. When the other jurors tried to explain the evidence to him and their reasoning why he should be found guilty, he reportedly stopped cooperating and refused to keep participating in the trial. The other jurors would later complain about him to the media, with one stating it was like reasoning with a child. Fortunately, a second trial was held, which ended in Richard being found guilty on November 21st, 1989. The jury deliberated for just 8 hours, with one juror later telling reporters that it was the massive totality of the evidence which had convinced them. He was sentenced to 50 years in prison. In 2009, Richard Crafts was 71 and still serving his sentence. He was prisoner number 152724 and was imprisoned at the MacDougall Walker Correctional Institution, a high and maximum security facility in Suffield, Connecticut. At this time, he had just 2 disciplinary tickets issued, both of which were for possession of contraband. In January of 2020, it was announced that, now aged 82, he had been moved to a halfway house as part of a transitional housing program for veterans in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Despite being sentenced to 50 years, he was released early for a myriad of reasons, but mostly due to an old sentencing law known as statutory good time. This law, which has since been amended, allowed for large amounts of time to be taken off a prisoner's sentence as a reward for good behaviour and good service while working jailhouse jobs. Had Crafts been sentenced under the newer laws, he would not have had any time shaved off his sentence and would likely still be in prison. Crafts was also released early so that he could transfer into a supervised program, rather than being released straight onto the streets and into public life. He has been classified as a low risk to the community. Before his release, he was serving time in a low security facility named the Willard Cybolski Correctional Institution.